Has someone ever tried to make you feel guilty for choosing yourself?
I was standing just outside Terminal C, fingers wrapped around the cheap plastic handle of a balloon that said, "Welcome back," in bold, stupid letters, the kind you'd grab last minute at a CVS when you're already running late but still want to show you care. The August sun was baking the top of my scalp, and the recycled air from the terminal's automatic doors kept brushing the backs of my calves like a teasing whisper. I kept checking the arrivals board through the glass, even though the screen hadn't changed in 20 minutes. Their flight had landed. Customs should have taken maybe 30 minutes tops, 40 if someone was being a diva about her carry-on liquids, which, knowing my sister Erin, was absolutely in the realm of possibility. I checked my phone again. Nothing. I texted my son, no reply. I called my mother, voicemail. Erin? I didn't even try her. She had me blocked since May. That should have been the first clue. There was something odd about the silence, not just in my phone but in my gut, a heaviness that had settled days earlier but only now started ringing alarm bells in my head. I thought maybe they'd missed the flight or something had happened in customs. But then, almost too casually, like it was a leftover item on a grocery list she forgot to mention, a text from Erin finally came through. The screen lit up, and I saw her name with the message, "We're already home. Didn't think it was a good idea to have you there. Didn't want tension on the boat." That was it. No greeting. No apology. No mention of how I was supposed to be on that cruise. No explanation about why my son, my own son, didn't even mention it to me. I just stared at the screen like it was written in a different language, something alien and cold, as if she wasn't my sister but a stranger who'd just picked up the wrong kid from school. Let me back up. That cruise wasn't some spontaneous family getaway. It was something we'd been planning for over a year. The idea came up at Thanksgiving last year, one of the rare times we'd all been in the same room without someone crying or storming out. My mom had been talking about how she wanted us to reconnect as a family before she got too old to drink rum out of coconuts. My sister Erin made a big show of volunteering to plan the whole thing, which was classic Erin. She loves being the center of the organizing universe, even when she sucks at it. I'd offered to help pay, especially since I knew our brother, Mark, wouldn't chip in and Erin's job as a part-time wellness coach was just a glorified MLM gig with herbs and Instagram quotes. I put down the deposit. I emailed the travel agent. I even bought matching flip-flops that said Family Cruise Crew in that cheesy glitter font. The only thing I didn't do was book the flights, because they never sent me the final itinerary. And now, here I was, holding a damn balloon like an idiot, realizing I'd been deliberately cut out of my own family's vacation. They'd boarded the ship, toasted each other with frozen drinks, laughed over dinners, posed for sunset pictures, all while pretending I didn't exist. And it wasn't just Erin. My mom, who I used to talk to every other day. My son, who lives under my roof and eats my groceries. All of them went along with it. That message from Erin, "Didn't want tension," hit me in a way nothing else had before. Because it wasn't just cruel, it was calculated. It was her way of rewriting history, of casting herself as the peacemaker, as if I was the unpredictable storm that could ruin the calm Caribbean waters. But she was the one who'd been living in my duplex for free the last 6 years, ever since her divorce and her credit went to hell. She was the one who begged me not to charge her rent until she got back on her feet, like she was ever planning to get off the couch. And here she was, sending me a text like she was doing me a favor by cutting me out of the picture. I didn't respond. I didn't call. I didn't yell or cry or demand answers. I just walked slowly back to my car, got in, and sat for a while with the air conditioning blasting in my face, the balloon still floating stupidly in the passenger seat like it was mocking me. The radio was playing something upbeat, which made it worse, so I shut it off. And then I drove, not home, not to my place. I drove to the duplex. It's a brick 2-flat in a quiet neighborhood just outside of town, a place I bought when the housing market dipped and I got lucky with a good interest rate. Erin moved into the downstairs unit after her separation, and at the time, I felt like I was being a good sister. She had nowhere to go, her credit was shot, and she was dragging 2 kids through a messy split. I told her she could stay rent-free until things stabilized. That was 6 years ago. Her kids moved out. She got a new boyfriend. And still, the rent never came. I'd hinted. I'd brought it up during family budgeting talks. She always had an excuse. I parked behind the building and walked in with my own keys. She never changed the locks, probably too lazy or just too confident I'd never cross a line. But something in me had shifted. Something that had been quiet and polite for too damn long. I went straight to the drawer in the hallway where I keep the important documents, leases, tax forms, ownership papers. And I pulled out the file labeled Downstairs Unit Lease. It was blank. She'd never signed it. That made things easier. I opened my laptop, found a template for a 30-day eviction notice, and filled in her name. I printed it, my hand steady in a way that surprised even me. I folded it neatly, slid it into a plain envelope, and wrote her name on the front. No drama. No yelling. Just facts. As I sealed the envelope, I looked around the unit. Same sagging couch. Same faded throw pillows. Same wine-stained coffee table from when she cried through her third breakup with some guy named Darren. And it hit me, she thought she'd always have this space, this cushion, this one-sided loyalty. She thought I'd keep bending no matter how far she pushed. But something broke in me when I read that text. Not because she left me out of the trip, but because she told the whole family it was better without me. So I gave her something else to worry about. Something with a deadline. Something legal. And I hadn't even started yet. It's strange how memory works, how you can forget a birthday or the name of a coworker's kid, but the exact tone of your sister's voice when she first learned how to manipulate a situation stays lodged in your brain like a splinter under the skin. Impossible to dig out without bleeding. I remember Erin's talent for deflection before I knew what the word even meant. I must have been 8 or 9, maybe younger, and she'd spilled orange juice all over Mom's new carpet. One of those peach-colored shag rugs that were hideous even by 90s standards, but sacred to my mother because she'd saved for months to buy it, and when Mom came storming and demanding answers, Erin didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't stutter. She just looked up at me, wide-eyed and innocent, and said, Lauren was running in the house again. That was it. No defense on my part. No hesitation on hers. I got grounded for a week, and Erin got a popsicle and a hug. That's the way it always was. And I know, every family has its roles, its dynamics, its little unspoken hierarchies. But ours? Ours was practically scripted. Erin was the charming one, the delicate one, the girl with the easy laugh and the big eyes, who could say the cruelest thing in the sweetest tone and make it sound like a compliment. I was the serious one, the worrier, the one who always took things too personally, which is a great way to gaslight someone for having normal emotional reactions to consistent disrespect. Growing up, I thought maybe I was crazy, maybe I was just sensitive, maybe Erin really didn't mean it like that. But as the years wore on, the patterns hardened, and I started realizing that no, she meant it like that. Every time. She just didn't think I'd ever push back. When our father passed away 10 years ago, something cracked between us, something that had already been wearing thin but finally tore all the way through. He'd been sick for a while, the kind of sick where you learn to count time in doctor's visits and lab results instead of birthdays and holidays, and when the end came, it was quiet and expected, but still like someone had pulled the floor out from under us. Erin grieved loudly, theatrically, in Facebook posts and monologues at the funeral that sounded like they were meant for a camera crew instead of a church. I grieved quietly, with long silences and knots in my stomach that wouldn't go away, and somehow, even in grief, the spotlight still stayed on her. She moved into the downstairs unit just a few months after the funeral, claiming she couldn't bear to stay in her house because it reminded her too much of Dad, but I knew the truth was more practical than poetic. Her marriage was falling apart, and she needed a place to land that. Didn't ask for rent. At the time, I didn't think twice. I told her she could stay for free, just until she figured things out, just until she got back on her feet, just until things settled. That word, until, became an elastic excuse she stretched for 6 years, and in that time, I watched her build a life on my generosity without ever acknowledging it. She started her little wellness business, selling overpriced teas and doing energy readings in the living room while incense burned and strangers traipsed through a home I owned. She never offered to contribute to the mortgage, never once asked if I needed help with taxes or repairs or maintenance. Instead, she acted like I owed her something, as if letting her stay rent-free was the least I could do for all the emotional support she provided the family, as if her presence alone was some kind of gift I should be grateful for. And still, I stayed quiet. I smiled at family dinners. I let her kids use my Netflix password. I paid the plumber when the sink clogged and never asked for reimbursement. Because that's what I was taught, to keep the peace, to be the bigger person, to let things slide in the name of family. But that cruise? That was different. That was a calculated act of erasure. That was her looking at a calendar, seeing my name, and deciding I didn't matter. And the part that kept me up that night, the part that made my stomach churn and my hands shake, wasn't just that she left me out. It was that she convinced everyone else to go along with it. My mother, my son, even Mark. They all boarded that ship knowing I wasn't invited. And not one of them thought to say a damn thing. I sat at the kitchen table that night with the eviction notice in front of me and signed, unsealed, waiting. Part of me still hesitated. Not because I didn't want to do it, no, the anger had calcified into something too dense for second guessing, but because I knew what would come next. The drama. The guilt. The endless phone calls and texts and voicemails from people who'd ignored me for weeks, but would suddenly find their voices now that Aaron was being held accountable. I could already hear my mother's voice. "She's your sister, Lauren." As if that word still meant something. As if blood was a shield against consequence. But then I opened Instagram. I don't even know why. I wasn't looking for anything. Maybe I was hoping for some acknowledgement, some half-hearted caption about missing me, some blurry photo where I was at least mentioned. What I found instead was a picture of the whole group, all smiling in matching white outfits on a beach in St. Thomas, the sun setting behind them like a postcard. Aaron was in the center, of course, wearing a ridiculous floppy hat and holding a cocktail, her arm around my son, who was grinning like he hadn't just lied to me for 10 straight days. And the caption? It said, "No drama. No tension. Just love. With a heart." That was it. That was the moment. No hesitation. No more second chances. I signed the notice. I sealed the envelope. I wrote her name in clean, straight letters on the front. And the next morning, I drove to the post office and mailed it certified. Not taped to the door. Not dropped in a mailbox. Certified. Because I wanted a record. I wanted proof. I wanted her to feel it, every single word. I didn't call her. I didn't warn her. I didn't give her a heads up or a grace period. I let the envelope do the talking, because I was done explaining myself to people who didn't hear me anyway. And the silence that followed? It was the sweetest peace I'd had in years. But it didn't last long. Because 3 days later, my phone lit up with a call from Erin. And when I didn't answer, she started texting. And when I didn't text back, she sent a voicemail. Her voice was tight, shaky, on the verge of tears, but not the real kind. The practice kind. The kind she used when she wanted to get out of a parking ticket or talk her way into a free upgrade. She said, "You can't be serious." She said, "This is crazy, even for you." And then she said the line I'd been waiting for since childhood, the line that always came when she realized her charm had stopped working. She said, "You wouldn't dare." And I smiled. Because she didn't know me anymore. The thing about Erin, and people like her in general, is that they never actually believe the rules apply to them, not really. Not when it matters, not when the stakes are high and the consequences start knocking at the door in real time. They float through life with this unshakable conviction that someone will always swoop in at the last second to cushion the fall, to reframe the narrative, to clean up the mess they made while still making them look like the victim. That's the entire scaffolding of Erin's personality, charm laced with calculated helplessness, the kind that lulls people into believing that standing up to her is the same as being cruel, the same as abandoning someone fragile. So when I dropped that eviction notice in the mail, I knew she wouldn't respond like a normal adult confronted with the natural consequence of overstaying a 6-year welcome. No, I knew she'd act shocked, indignant, morally outraged, as if I'd just set fire to the family home over a minor disagreement, and sure enough, not even 72 hours later, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. First came the texts, short, clipped, trying to feel me out without sounding too desperate. "Did you send something?" she wrote, as if maybe the letter had been some sort of clerical error, a misunderstanding, a piece of mail sent by mistake from a faceless system she wasn't part of. When I didn't answer, she followed up with, "I just got something weird in the mail. Was that you?" Still no answer from me, and that's when the panic started leaking through. "Lauren, seriously, this isn't funny." The next text had no punctuation, just 3 words typed out fast like she couldn't catch her breath, "You wouldn't dare." I let it sit. I didn't reply. I wanted her to sit in the discomfort for once, to feel what it's like to be on the other side of one of her dismissals, one of her cool little betrayals she always papered over with a joke or a mimosa. I wanted her to realize that this time, the silence meant something permanent. But she couldn't tolerate that, not even for a full day, because the next morning I woke up to a voicemail, and as soon as I saw her name on the screen, I knew exactly what was waiting inside, a symphony of gaslighting, half-truths, and carefully selected emotions designed to make me feel like the villain in a story she wrote without ever asking me to play a role in it. "Hey," she began, her voice soft, uncertain, with just enough tremble to imply that she'd been crying, or at least wanted me to think she had. "I got your notice, and I don't even know what to say. I mean, is this really what we're doing now? Is this here now? Because if this is about the cruise, then I think you're blowing it way out of proportion. I didn't invite you because I thought it would be better for everyone, and I really, truly didn't mean it as an attack. I just wanted peace for once. And now you're trying to evict me?" She paused, and for a second I thought she was done, but then came the kicker, the line she knew would twist the knife if I let it. "What would Dad say about this, Lauren? I mean, he always told us to take care of each other." And, just like that, the guilt card was on the table, face down but unmistakable, and I could practically hear the faint smile behind her voice as she added, "Anyway, I hope you come to your senses, because this isn't like you. I'll call you later." I stared at my phone for a long time after the voicemail ended, not because I didn't know how to feel, I knew exactly how I felt, but because I wanted to let the words settle, to see if they still held any power over me. For years, Aaron's emotional sleight of hand had worked like clockwork, flipping my anger into guilt, my boundaries into cruelty, my silence into weakness. But something was different now. Maybe it was the image of that cruise photo burned into my brain. Maybe it was the way my son still hadn't said a word to me, not even a perfunctory apology or a badly explained excuse. Or maybe it was just that I was done. Really, actually done. Later that day, I got a call from someone I hadn't heard from in months, my mother. Her name popping up on my screen made my stomach clench, not out of fear, but out of the kind of dread that only comes from knowing exactly what someone is going to say before they say it, and knowing that no matter how you respond, you'll somehow be the one painted in the wrong. I let it go to voicemail too. Her message wasn't long, but it was heavy with that familiar tone she always used when trying to shame me into compliance, a tone that wrapped judgment in faux concern like a bitter pill coated in honey. "Lauren, I don't know what's going on between you and your sister, but this isn't the way. You're tearing the family apart. Again. I know you've had your differences, but she's your sister, and family is supposed to stick together, especially now. Please, just be the bigger person. Call her. Fix it." That word, again, echoed in my head long after the message ended, because it wasn't just a casual aside, it was a pointed accusation, a not-so-subtle reminder that in my mother's mind, I'd always been the problem, the instigator. The one who overreacted. Aaron could set fire to the furniture, and I'd be blamed for complaining about the smoke. That voicemail was a cold slap, not because it hurt, but because it was so predictable, so perfectly on brand for the role I was expected to play in the family melodrama we'd been recycling for decades. Be the bigger person. Swallow the insult. Pretend nothing happened. But I was done pretending. I wasn't going to smooth this over with a forced smile and a casserole. I wasn't going to let another manufactured crisis distract from the real issue. Erin had made her choice when she excluded me from that cruise. She'd made her choice every time she ignored the fact that she was living on my dime while treating me like an inconvenient footnote in her life. And now I was making mine. Still, Even as I sat in my quiet apartment, phone on silent, legal documents filed neatly in a folder on my desk, I couldn't shake the slight unease that was beginning to creep in, not doubt, not regret, but something sharper and colder. A whisper of suspicion that maybe Erin wasn't panicking just because she'd lost her free housing. Maybe she was scared for another reason entirely. Maybe she knew something I didn't. Or maybe, just maybe, I'd finally backed her into a corner, and Erin, for all her charm and performance, was never very good when she wasn't the one holding the script. Whatever it was, I could feel it building, something bigger than a sibling spat, something festering just beneath the surface, and I knew, deep down, that the next time she called, it wouldn't be about reconciliation. It would be war. There's a particular kind of fatigue that doesn't come from work or lack of sleep or stress about bills, but from the relentless, soul-numbing effort of trying to explain yourself to people who've already decided they're not going to hear you. No matter how clearly you speak or how calmly you lay out your side, because somewhere deep in their memory, or maybe just in their preference, you're already the difficult one, the emotional one, the one who makes things worse by not letting things go. That's the fatigue I felt sitting in my car in front of my mother's house, the same house I grew up in, a house filled with memories that somehow always seemed to orbit Erin like she was the sun, and the rest of us were lucky just to revolve around her. I hadn't planned to go there, not really. The visit wasn't part of some strategic move or gesture of diplomacy. I'd told myself I was going to pick up an old photo album my mom had promised me years ago but never actually gave me, but the truth was more pathetic. I just wanted to see if maybe, for once, my mother could look at me and see something other than an overreaction, could see that I wasn't trying to tear the family apart, wasn't punishing anyone, wasn't being cruel for the sake of it. I wanted her to say, "You're right, Lauren," even just once, in a tone that didn't sound like a peace offering laced with an insult. But as soon as she opened the door, I knew it wasn't going to happen. There was something stiff in her smile, something rehearsed in the way she stepped aside and motioned me in like a hostess who hadn't decided whether you were welcome or just a problem that needed managing. Her living room looked the same as always, too many floral patterns, too many family photos on every surface, Erin's face plastered across every milestone like she was the only child who ever mattered. And as soon as I stepped inside, I noticed the extra pair of shoes by the hallway bench. The kind of shoes Erin wears. Of course. I didn't know Erin was here, I said, already regretting everything, already bracing for the ambush I now realized I'd walked into voluntarily. She stopped by earlier, my mother replied, too quickly, too casually, her voice just a touch too high. She was upset, and I told her to stay for dinner. I thought maybe we could talk this through, as a family. That word, family, landed like a slap, not because it wasn't true, but because it was always weaponized when they wanted me to back down, when they wanted me to absorb the hurt in silence for the sake of unity, which always, somehow, meant giving Erin whatever she needed. Erin appeared in the doorway a moment later, holding a glass of wine, barefoot and smiling like she was the one extending the olive branch, like this whole thing wasn't her doing. "Hey," she said, and her voice was so thick with faux sincerity it made my skin crawl. "I'm really glad you came. We need to talk." There it was a we. Not I. Because Erin never does anything alone. She always needs an audience, a buffer, someone to step in and validate her version of the truth before I can even respond. I sat down, refusing to let the tension show, refusing to let her see how deeply it stung that my mother had called this meeting without warning, had clearly already heard Erin's side and had chosen, once again, to frame this as a misunderstanding that I should help fix. "I just think," my mother began, and already I could feel the familiar script unfolding, "that things have gotten out of hand, and you girls need to stop letting one mistake destroy everything we've built. I know you're hurt, Lauren, and you have every right to feel that way, but evicting your sister? Over a vacation?" It was such a grotesque simplification of what had happened, so wildly disconnected from the reality of how I'd been systematically excluded, ignored, disrespected, and dismissed, that for a moment, I couldn't even respond. My mouth was dry. My hands clenched around the fabric of my jeans. I looked at Erin, who was nodding along sympathetically, the picture of reasonable disappointment, and I realized they'd already had this conversation, probably over tea in the kitchen, with Aaron crying and my mother holding her hand, already forming the narrative that I was unstable, vindictive, dangerous even. "It's not about the vacation," I said finally, my voice low and steady, because I wasn't going to yell. I refused to give them that image. "It's about everything that came before it. It's about the years I let you live in that unit without rent, without a lease, while you acted like it was owed to you. It's about the fact that you excluded me from a trip I helped plan, with people I love, and then had the nerve to pretend it was for my benefit. You didn't want peace. You wanted me gone." Erin's expression twisted slightly, a flicker of anger behind her eyes, but my mother cut in before she could speak. She was trying to keep the trip light, Lauren. You two have had so much tension lately, and she thought it would be simpler. It wasn't meant to hurt you. And yet, I said, not bothering to mask the exhaustion in my voice, it did. There was a long silence. Not dramatic. Just heavy. The kind that sits between people when there's nothing else left to say, when the truth has already been spoken, but no one wants to acknowledge it. Erin sipped her wine and looked away. My mother looked at me like I'd just disappointed her in some way she couldn't articulate but deeply believed. And in that moment, I understood something I should have known years ago. I wasn't going to get closure. Not here. Not from them. Because to them, my pain was a problem to be solved, not a truth to be honored. I stood up, calmly, without making a scene. I reached into my purse, pulled out a second envelope, another certified copy of the notice, and placed it on the coffee table. Erin's name was written on the front in the same careful handwriting. I looked directly at her as I said, "You have 3 weeks left." My mother gasped, like I'd just slapped someone, but I ignored her. Erin opened her mouth to say something, but I turned and walked toward the door, already done with whatever performance she had prepared. I didn't owe them my patience anymore. I didn't owe them my silence. As I stepped outside, the air hit me like a wall, thick, humid, heavy with the storm that was rolling in from the west. And for the first time in years, I felt something strange bloom in my chest, not satisfaction exactly, and certainly not peace, but a kind of raw, unfiltered clarity. The kind that comes not from being right, but from finally refusing to be wronged again. I didn't check my phone when it started vibrating in my purse. I didn't want to see the damage control texts from my mother, or the guilt trap voicemails from Erin. I just got in my car, started the engine, and pulled away from the house I'd once called home, knowing full well that the next 3 weeks would be hell. But after 6 years of swallowing it all down, I was more than ready to drag it up. There's a quietness that settles in during the final days of a countdown, not the panicked, scrambling kind you'd expect when someone realizes their time is running out, but a more insidious, artificial calm that only exists because the person at the center of it all is still clinging to the belief that, somehow, something will come in at the last second to undo the consequences they've been desperately trying not to believe in. Erin, true to form, spent the bulk of those 30 days acting like the whole thing was just a phase I'd move on from, a tantrum I was throwing because I was hurt and reactive and not seeing the bigger picture, and in her delusional little world, she was still the one with the moral high ground, still the wronged sister, still the person holding the final word even though the ink on the notice I sent her had long since dried. She didn't pack. She didn't look for another place. She didn't so much as empty a drawer. And every few days, like clockwork, she would send me a text or leave a voicemail that danced somewhere between pleading and passive-aggressive, always laced with the same unbearable sweetness that she thought made her sound sincere, but only made the rot underneath it more obvious. "I know you're still upset," she wrote once, as if my feelings were some irrational storm cloud I should just wait out like bad weather. "But I've been doing some thinking, and I really think we can work this out. Maybe you just need some time." As if time was the issue. As if the years I'd already given her weren't proof enough that I'd waited long past the point of reason. What she meant, what she always meant, was that she was banking on me softening, on me reverting to the version of myself she could guilt and manipulate, the Lauren who didn't make ultimatums, who didn't follow through, who said yes when she wanted to say, "Get out." But I didn't respond. Not once. I didn't explain, didn't clarify, didn't rehash what had already been said. Because I'd finally learned that people like Aaron don't need more words to understand you. They need silence to realize they've run out of excuses. And yet, as the final week loomed, something changed not in me, but in the way she behaved. The texts became more desperate. The voicemails more unhinged. She started reaching out to mutual friends, to our brother Mark, even to my coworkers, trying to loop anyone and everyone into the narrative she was constructing where she was the helpless victim of a cruel, vindictive sister on a power trip. One night, I even got a call from a former neighbor, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year, telling me Erin had been talking about taking legal action against me, even though she had no lease, no rent record. Nothing binding her to that property beyond the twisted assumption that I'd never actually make her leave. The worst, though, came on day 27. I came home from work, tired and aching, only to find 2 news vans parked down the street near the duplex, real ones, with camera crews and bright lights and bored-looking reporters standing around like they were waiting for something to erupt. At first, I thought maybe it had nothing to do with me, that maybe something had happened in the neighborhood, a break-in, a local election, whatever. But then I saw Erin, standing on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, talking to one of the reporters like she'd just been evicted by some heartless landlord during a humanitarian crisis. She wasn't crying, not yet, but her face had that practiced expression, somewhere between wounded and brave, that she always wore when she wanted the world to believe she was rising above injustice. I stood there, stunned, the keys still in my hand, watching my sister turn her own irresponsibility into a public relations stunt. I didn't speak. I didn't march over or scream or demand an explanation. Instead, I walked past the crew without saying a word, stepped into the upstairs unit, and calmly opened the drawer where I kept all the documents, mortgage records, utility bills, tax receipts, every itemized detail that proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Erin had never paid a dime. Not for water. Not for gas. Not for trash collection. I printed everything. Made copies. And when the reporter knocked on my door an hour later, hoping for a quote or a confrontation or some dramatic rebuttal to Erin's narrative, I handed him the folder and said only this: she's lived here for free for 6 years. I own the building. This is not a story about injustice. It's a story about boundaries. He didn't say much. Just took the folder, nodded, and left. Whether it ever aired, I don't know. I didn't care. I wasn't playing that game. I wasn't trying to win the public opinion lottery. I was just trying to reclaim the space I'd been slowly pushed out of emotionally, financially, physically for far too long. On day 30, Erin finally moved out. No fanfare. No apology. No last-ditch tantrum. She left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "I hope someday you see what you've done," which I read twice before throwing in the trash. The unit was a mess, dust everywhere, garbage bags that hadn't been taken out, a broken lamp I didn't recognize, and the faint smell of incense still clinging to the curtains, but it was empty. And that emptiness, for all its chaos, felt cleaner than any version of our relationship had ever been. I stood in the middle of that space, surrounded by the echoes of Erin's entitlement, and for a brief moment, I expected to feel triumphant, to feel like justice had finally been served, like I'd won something. But the truth, the ugly, honest truth, is that I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. Not because I regretted it. I didn't. Not even a little. But because revenge, no matter how justified, doesn't fill the place where love should have been. It doesn't patch the hole left behind by years of trying, years of believing that maybe, just maybe, if you gave enough, forgave enough, bent far enough, you could finally be seen. In the days that followed, the phone calls stopped. The texts ended. My mother didn't reach out, and I didn't expect her to. The silence that settled was different this time, not peaceful, not hostile, just final. And I started asking myself the question I hadn't been brave enough to face before. Had I become the villain in someone else's story? And if so, did it even matter? Because the truth is, being the villain isn't always about doing something wrong. Sometimes it's just about finally doing something right for yourself after years of pretending you didn't matter. And maybe people will never understand that. Maybe they'll remember me as the one who burned the bridge instead of the one who kept patching it for decades while the other person lit the matches. That's fine. Let them. In the end, the only thing I know for sure is this: I didn't kick my sister out because of a cruise. I evicted her because she was never going to leave unless I forced her to. And sometimes, in families like mine, the only way to be heard is to do something loud enough that no one can ignore it. Even if it means you're remembered as the villain for the rest of your life.